Good morning, Dan and Amy. And we heard in Mike Scott's newscast the Toronto shooter that killed 2 women, injured more than a dozen others. Pakistani Canadian, characterized by his family as suffering from depression. We know from friends in Toronto and now news reports that he was known to police, that he had some experience, if not training, with firearms. And now ISIS has claimed that he was one of their terrorist warriors.
Oh, that's strange because his parents came out with a joint statement with Toronto police saying that he suffered depression and mental illness and psychosis.
Nothing to do with being an Islamist.
Nothing at all.
Not
Never
radicalized.
even mentioned.
Yeah, it's always disconcerting when you have law enforcement appearing to conspire to mislead you. And the key thing that you said was law enforcement and the CBC not releasing the name of the shooter until they did so in conjunction with a statement that had already been prepared and released simultaneously by his family. Strange. For more on this topic and others of national security import, we're pleased to be joined by Bill Gertz, senior editor for the Washington Free Beacon, author of the book I War, War and Peace in the Information Age. Bill, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hi, Dan and Amy. Good to be on the show.
If the reports are, well, if ISIS isn't just claiming credit without foundation, what does that say about kind of the current state of play with respect to radical Islamist terrorism? We've been diverted in terms of our attention to Russia and to North Korea, to some extent Central and South America immigration policy. And we haven't talked much in the last several months about the threat that radical Islamic terror still poses.
Yeah, the good news is in Syria, the U.S. and the allies there have done a really good job of decimating the Islamic State terror group. I mean, they are definitely no longer controlling the same kind of territory that they did a couple of years ago. The bad news is that a lot of the people that went there to fight jihad and to conduct attacks and to try and take part in this Islamic caliphate that no longer exists there, people have gone to their home states and are basically following the directive to conduct attacks in their home countries. Whether this Canadian attack was a terror attack, we'll probably need to get a few more details, but we just don't know at this point.
There seems to be growing concern. I was reading a number of articles about residents in Toronto fearing that this would happen. Do you know what their immigration policy is like in Canada?
Well, you know, they definitely have a liberal immigration policy, and they have not been that good on dealing with the terrorist threat. I know that they work closely with the U.S. in that area. The U.S. is very careful to see that terrorists don't use Canada as a stepping point for entering the United States. But, you know, it seems to me that the real threats we have these days are from people that are mentally ill or from terrorists. Those seem to be the main motivations behind the kind of mass shootings that we've been seeing so often.
I wanted to just get your take on the FISA courts. You know, the left wants to abolish ICE. Bill McGurn in the Wall Street Journal writing that we should abolish FISA courts. This in the aftermath of the release of the Carter Page FISA application documents. He suggests that we've gotten to this place. I mean, again, FISA courts have been around for 40-some years, not that long, not the founding of the nation, not constitutional per se. He invokes, as McGurn, Robert Bork, who warned about the FISA courts at the advent of their creation, a concern that the courts would just defer to intelligence agencies and become a rubber stamp, which arguably FISA has become. Why not make executives who spy on American citizens or engage in the sort of behavior that is authorized by the FISA court directly accountable for the decisions they make, as opposed to hiding behind judges? What do you say to that with respect to the FISA court?
Yeah, it's a tough call. Domestic spying is very difficult, and it's a useful tool for both law enforcement and counterterrorism intelligence gathering and for counter-spying as well. but it does create these problems. There's no question in my mind that what we saw in the Carter Page declassified FISA application, which again was heavily redacted, was that they used bad information. They had a politicized dossier and from several different directions coming in, and they used that to spy on the Trump campaign. I mean, that's really the bottom line. It was an abuse of power by the FBI. Now, I think that they can, if they can recognize that and admit that, then they got to make some reforms and try to fix that problem. But to say that there's no indication that this was politicization, and of course, you have Peter Strzok, the center of this whole FBI scandal, claiming that he was not biased when clearly his text showed that he was out to stop the Trump campaign and prevent Trump from becoming president. So it's clearly a huge problem for the FBI, and I think the Trump administration really needs to institute some major reforms of the FBI, and that's really where the problem comes.
Well, now,
I think the FISA Court is needed, definitely.
You do think the FISA Court is needed? Because I was going to say, I mean, the documents released, it is worth noting, just to push back against McGurn's argument, that you had Jim Comey sign off, you had Sally Yates sign off at Department of Justice, so it's not like they're absolved of responsibility just because it's a judge that's making the ultimate decision. Maybe you'll get judges that now, in the wake of some of these revelations, no longer just serve as rubber stamps.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they need to tighten up the procedures, and the procedures are already tight. In other words, especially when they approve a surveillance of an American, they're required to have extraordinary evidence that this is really needed. When it involves a foreign subject, like a foreign terrorist or a foreign spy, then it's less stringent, the requirements for the FISA application. But in this case, when they're asking for permission to spy on an American, and an American who's a member of a political campaign, a presidential campaign, I think that there really were some lapses in the whole process.
No, and then learning, too, that when James Comey went to the Trump Tower to meet with then-candidate Trump, he didn't even tell him where the Steele dossier came from, that it was actually funded by the Democrats. Do you think he stepped in it there as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this whole thing just stinks of politicization of the FBI at the upper levels, and again, I think that it's time for some major reforms. They've got to recognize that they have a problem within the FBI and work to depoliticize it.
Well, where are we on North Korea in your estimation? We were just talking to Rich Lowry at the top of the hour about this and about the report this week that Kim Jong-un is dismantling some key missile launch sites. Is this just sort of a show to keep America strung along on the topic, or is this a positive indication of a substantive step towards denuclearization?
Very hard to say. Any kind of overhead surveillance, spy satellites and things for North Korea has to be very, very carefully evaluated, because the North Koreans are very good at hiding things underground. So whenever they claim that they're dismantling some missile testing facilities and things like that, that could be done because they know clearly that they can fool U.S. intelligence into thinking that they're taking some positive steps. The U.S. absolutely wants to see that kind of thing, so they're really showing U.S. intelligence what they want to believe, that North Korea is going to go along with this very difficult process of denuclearization.
And then the last axis of evil country we want to discuss, of course, Iran, Rouhani. And the speech that Pompeo gave this week, where he included, in addition to sort of a lot of history of Iran since the revolution, an overture to those pro-small d democracy forces in Iran, sort of encouragement for regime change coming from the inside. And I wonder, in the context of what you just described, the landscape is in Syria, where you think we are with Iran and how we should be triangulating them in the Middle East.
Yeah, I think this is the kind of thing we're seeing that the Trump administration do, both through the president's tweet as well as Pompeo's statements and support for the Iranian people. this is the kind of information warfare that we need to be doing to really help the people of Iran to change their system, to reform that system, and because they don't want it. They don't want to be ruled by a theocratic state that is supporting terrorists around the world. And of course, Iran is the largest state sponsor of terrorism. They're expanding in the Middle East. They're trying to become the regional hegemon there. And I think using information means, we saw also for the first time the Secretary of State do a tweet in Farsi, which is really the best way to try and reach directly to the Iranian people. So, yeah, I think they're doing the right thing on that.
And for those of us who missed that tweet, what was it? Can you translate?
Oh, I don't know, but it was basically saying that the U.S. supports the Iranian people and not the Iranian government.
He is Bill Gertz, senior editor for the Washington Free Beacon, author of the book I War, War and Peace in the Information Age. Bill, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.